All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Troutdale Budget Committee for Monday, April 15th, 2024. We can have roll call, please.
Mayor Maurer. Councilor Redma.
Oh, he's coming in.
Councilor Casserla. Councilor Lund.
Present.
Councilor White.
Here.
Councilor Wittrin.
Present.
Councilor Glantz.
Present.
Hello.
Dennis Stephenson.
Here.
Steve Venn.
Here.
Megan Timberman.
Here.
Chris Barney.
Here.
Paul Wilcox.
Here.
Victoria Rizzo.
Here.
Rich Ellen.
Here.
Kevin Peacock.
Here.
That is a quorum.
Is it you? Go ahead, Mr. Ray Young.
Well, thank you, Chair Tammy Stephenson. I want to thank all of you so much for spending your time this evening, coming and joining us in person or on Zoom. This is going to be a slight filibuster that I do every year, and I might copy some of the stuff you have in your budget message already. But I think it's always important to start with some background information and some information in the budget before we get into the presentation from Eric and then your discussion. First of all, municipal budgeting is always fun. It's fun because it's so unlike your personal and business type budgeting. But I want to keep a couple of those differences in mind so that we remember how it is different. First of all, if it's not in the budget, we can't spend it without the electeds approving it. Therefore, in all cities' budgets, including Troutdale's, items will be budgeted that are unlikely to ever get done in the next budget year, or may get done for a lot less than budgeted. For example, in this next year's budget, you will see that we have budgeted almost another $900,000 to do Dunbar Street. Well, we budgeted this year to do $900,000 to improve Dunbar Street. Does that mean you're going to do it twice? No, it just means that because of staffing issues, because of other projects, we were not able to get to the $900,000 project on Dunbar Street, but it carries over to next year because we still need to do the project. So those types of things are going to happen in the budget. We're going to have things in there that looks like, you know, we've had these capital projects a couple of years, we haven't done them. It doesn't mean we still don't need to do them. It just means we're waiting until we have the staff, the resources, or the supply chain issues to do it. The second thing about municipal budgeting is that just because it's in a budget doesn't mean we'll spend it. It simply means it's authorized. And it's something that I have, you know, we've all heard the rumors of government agencies where everybody puts in all these budget requests in June, right before the fiscal year ends. That is not what we do at the City of Troutdale, and it's something that we would not ever allow. We don't, just because you have a budget for something doesn't mean you have to spend it. And so it's real important to understand that when we put it in the budget, it's because we want to make sure it's authorized just in case it needs to get spent. One example in the budget you have for next year is you'll see an expense for the GSA property of $100,000. It's in the budget at $100,000. If you didn't have to put me under oath, I would tell you the truth without that, saying, I doubt we'll spend any of that $100,000. But it's in the budget. It's in the budget because we have to show the federal government who deeded us the property that we have the ability, i.e. it's budgeted, to do the improvements on the property they might think are necessary to comply with our deed. Now, long story short, we may end up giving that property back because it became a real headache with cleanup issues. But we still have an obligation to show in the budget that we are able to do something with that property based upon the agreement we have with the federal government. So that's why you'll see things in the budget that may not get spent, but have to be there for certain reasons. Another reason, somebody, and one of the questions asked, why is the council conference and travel budget always $15,000, $16,000, but you never spend more than $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000 in a year? Can we cut that down? Well, we could. However, technically, all 7 council members have a right, if they have the time, to go to the LOC meeting in the fall, to go to other conferences during the year. And so we have to budget for what might be needed during the year, even though we think the odds of that happening are slim, very slim. And so you will see in a budget that things will be listed, things will be budgeted way above what we've ever spent in the past, not because we think that's what we're going to spend, that higher limit. It's because it could happen, and we need to put it in the budget so it's properly represented as a possible expense so that we can spend it if that odd blue moon event where a lot of the council wants to go that hadn't gone before. So that's why there's a huge difference between, we've had this discussion every year, between deficit spending and deficit budgeting. Most years, you will see a budget that is a deficit budget, but you will almost never see the end of the year having deficit spending, and that's an important thing to remember as we go through this process. An example would be the year we did Imagination Station, which I believe was 2018. In that year, we had a very large general fund expense of probably $800,000. That means that that year, because we had such a large one-time expense, our spending in 2018 was more than our income that year because we had that one large expense. We had money in ending fund balance that the council elected to approve to spend it on that. But that was the last year actually that the actual spending of the staff exceeded the actual income for the general fund. And that's real important to remember. It only happens when this body and the council approves it. I'll go through the last 4 years, just for his history lesson. In 2019, we had general fund income of $12.7 million. We only spent $11.2. We netted $1.5 million. 2020-21, we had a general fund income of $13.4 million, but we only expended $12.4. We had $8 million net that year. In 2021-22, we had a general fund income of $15.5 million, but we only spent $12.4 million, a net of $3.1. And finally, last budgeted year, 22-23, which has already been audited, we had actual income of $17 million. We'd only budgeted for $15 million in income, but our expenses were $16 million. So let me back up here. So last full budget year, 22-23, we budgeted to have $15.5 million in income, and we budgeted to spend $16.3 million. Oh, there's that deficit budgeting again. However, last full budget year ended with $17 million in income and only $14.2 in actual expenses. And so instead of having a loss, we had a net gain of $2.8 million in the last full fiscal year. All of this adds up to mean that our ending fund balance, which is the amount of money we have left over for right now, we'll talk about the general fund. The ending fund balance is how much of our income and ending fund balances from before is left over after we paid all the bills for that budget year. Last budget year, 22-23, the City of Troutdale had a record $10.8 million in ending fund balance, which means we have driven up the ending fund balance over the last number of years to $10.8 million. And so what it shows is for the last, since Imagination Station was built, every year we've added to our ending fund balance. So it's important to remember that there's a difference between what we put in the budget that may look scary, and we definitely understand that, but in actuality, for the reasons I just talked about, will end up being likely, again, another net increase in our ending fund balance. The other thing to remember about our budget is the silos. I use this phrase, Eric doesn't use this phrase, I think they're called enterprise funds, is what we technically call them. The city has like 27 different funds, and each of those funds is for a particular purpose. The most discretionary of all those funds is the general fund, but the general fund makes up about 1/4 of the overall income to the city, which is used for fire, police, parks, and administrative costs. But all the other silos and funds, like the water fund, the sewer fund, the street fund, all of those funds are based upon income that we get because of streets, water, wastewater, whatever, and those funds can only be used for the purposes for what they were given. So we will have all these siloed funds, and they look like, well, we have so much money sitting over here, can we use it for over here? Answer, no, you can't. It can only be spent within that siloed funds. And so if you want to look at the big picture, though, I talked about the ending fund balance for the general fund going up every year toward last budget year was a record $10.8 million. If you look at citywide funds, you add up all these siloed funds and you look at what's been going on throughout the city finances, you will see that back in July 1st, 2016, we had $15 million in ending fund balances across our whole budget. The last audited year, July 1st, 2023, we had $43 million in ending fund balance, which means that in the 7 years between July 1st, 2016 and July 1st, 2023, our overall city finance money, ending fund balance, grew up to $43 million, another city record. I say all that in hopes of giving you confidence that the actual managing of the budget has been very frugal and very conscientious by your citizens. So even though we may deficit budget to be flexible, as I talked about, we don't deficit spend because your staff is frugal. Now, the fourth thing you need to understand about our budgets is the contingencies. I know we talk about this every year because there's a debate about whether we should put it in the budget, contingencies. Because we have such a large ending fund balance of $43 million, and of course all the funds have income, we will never use up all that $43 million in any given year. It just won't happen. So what do we do with the money we know we're not going to spend next year because we have it as an ending fund balance? Well, I guess you could not put it in the budget, but as we've talked about before, that just means it sits in a, you know, I hate to use the old Al Gore phrase, a lockbox, just like Social Security is a lockbox. But if you don't put it in there, then you can't spend it during the budget year, is the general rule. And so what we do is all the monies that are usually the ending fund balances and excess income, we put it into a column called contingencies, which means that each of those siloed funds, all the different funds we have, each will have their own contingency in there, which is the money that we have or expect to have next year, but we don't anticipate needing to spend it all. But if there is a contingency, in case an emergency happens, in case a development happens, or we need to spend money, say for a wastewater thing. But the only way to ever spend that contingency line item budget is if council approves it first. Staff does not have discretion to dip into those contingency budgets. So our advice has always been to make sure that we put money into contingency so that at least it's available in case something happens that we can't anticipate at this time of the year. So that's why we have those contingency budgets. Now, kind of the last area I want to touch on is adding staff. That's always something that we need to discuss because I'm with you. Growth in government, as a general rule, is not favored among a lot of people, especially in Troutdale. However, that as our population grows, as our facilities grows, as our businesses grows, and people use more services, we have to have staff to continue to meet those needs. In the budget that you're presented with tonight, we are asking for 1 additional FTE in parks, 1 additional FTE in HR, and a 0.5 FTE in recreation and community events. Now, first of all, as somebody asked in the questions, they look at this chart, and I don't even know why we have it in there, because I don't think it's really relevant, as I'll tell you why in a second here. When you have our FTE versus our population, it's like, oh, well, the amount of staff you have versus our population keeps growing up. That maybe is not a good thing. Well, first you need to understand a couple things about that ratio that you see. Our staff back in 2008, before the Great Recession, when we laid off a lot of people in a couple years, was 57.3 FTE. Now, 16 years later, in this budget, we're asking it to be 65.75. An 8 FTE increase in the last 16 years. I would submit that's not a very huge growth in government in Troutdale, if you consider back to that time when our FTE was at that level. Second of all, the population versus our FTE is not a good indication of the workload that's being put on your staff. In 2008, there was no Trip industrial layer, there was no FedEx, there was no Amazon, there was no Troutdale Cubes. All told, about 5,000 more people are working in the city of Troutdale than there was 16 years ago. That adds a huge amount of work to our public works department, but it effectively doesn't add anybody to our population. It just adds more work to your staff. Now, they, of course, all pay increased utility rates in all these facilities, but we have to have staff to be able to meet all those increased needs. Population is a small part of it because in the last 16 years, we have probably added roughly, 1,000 more housing units in this city, which of course means more population. But all that means we have, more obligations that may not be reflected in population. Additionally, since that 16 years ago, we have added the gas tax. That gas tax gives us approximately $1 million a year to improve our streets in this city. And that money doesn't get spent on its own. It needs staff to be able to oversee the spending of that extra gas tax money that we have. So that's another reason that pressure is put on staff and we need more staff. So I say all that to say, remember, in the greater scheme of things, historically, development-wise, in the last 16 years, I would submit that the growth in staff from approximately 57 to 65 over that time is not an unreasonable increase for what we're asking for. Now, the 3 positions in particular. Number 1, parks. I got to be honest with you, every year since I've been on this job, Parks comes to me every year and says, we need more in parks. Because parks is busy, people love our parks. And I keep saying, no, we need FTE in this place or this place. I keep telling them no, but what I've told them is when we have increased facilities in this city, that's when we can justify asking for more parks personnel. So that's why we're asking for one parks personnel, because now and into next year, we are going to have a big improvement in our parks facilities. Number one, next year, woohoo, we'll talk about a little bit later, we're going to have a new Sandy River Waterfront Trail Park, another 3-acre park in Troutdale that will be a gem for the whole region. We are going to have improvements at Depot Park, because that's the terminus downtown Troutdale for that big, wonderful park. We've added the off-leash dog park to the Parks Department. This year, we have budgeted, and it's budgeted into next year, we have the skate park is being added to the list of parks facilities. And finally, in the Beaver Creek Canyon, which is a huge complex of trails, but it's 2 sets of trails that don't touch each other. We have all the trails on the east and all the trails on the west, and the bridge in between is poof, gone. Well, we are right now in the process of filing up some grants to be able to get most of that paid for by Metro and the state to finally put a bridge down there in that canyon, which will open up all that area to recreational uses, and that also puts demands on parks. So that is why we are asking finally, with all that final improvement in the parks and the facilities, we need one extra person in parks to maintain all these things so that they are able to be used by our citizens. Second of all, we are asking for one FTE in human resources. We have had one FTE in HR for more than 20 years, Eric, haven't we? Well, more than 20 years, one person. And in those 20 years, I imagine that you can guess that the federal government, the state government, and local governments have increased the rules regarding how you manage things when it comes to your employees. And during that time, especially now, we have seen in this job market, it's much harder to retain, to recruit, and to hire individuals. And we have to be on top of that and dealing with that. All of this creates more work for our HR department, and we're finally saying, we need more help in the HR department to be able to continue to properly service our current employees, recruit high-quality new employees, and to meet all the myriad of rules and regulations that everybody's thrown at us. I almost think COVID was like an excuse to throw more rules on us. They just started throwing them out of the state and the feds, and it was just crazy to try to keep on top of all that stuff. So that's the second FTE. The final FTE is a result of good news. We are asking for a half-time increase in the recreation department and community events. This person, at a half-time person, would support both rec and community events. The reason is we are so successful. The rec department is just overwhelmed with people signing up for classes. They're routinely sold out, all of our rec classes. We're wanting to add more, but we don't have the staff. We only have one FTE, Molly, she runs the rec department. And then when we have community events in the summer, like movies in the park, First Fridays, the Christmas movie, the tree lightings, all those community events, those have blown up in terms of popularity in the city. I mean, last summer we had 2 movies in the park. They each had 400 to 500 people come to those movies in the park, more than we've ever had before. In the budget this year, for next year, we're asking budget for a 3rd movie night. They're so popular. It is very rewarding to see the citizens respond positively to the community events that we're offering them and the rec classes that we're offering them, but it comes at a cost. If we're going to continue to service our citizens and they show us what their need, it's like the ultimate capitalist system. Demand pushes this need for an extra half person. They want, to continue the community events and the rec classes that we have. So overall, I don't think it's an unreasonable request to increase our staffing for next year 2.5. I think as you look at our budget and our ending fund balances over the years, we continue to be healthy in how our budgets end. And so in conclusion, and you're going, thank heaven, Ray is finally about done. But history shows us that staff is managing your budget, your tax dollars really well. The ending fund balance in all accounts has continued to grow, as I've told you. We're at record amounts in both overall funds and in the general fund. Will it continue to rise? There's no guarantee of that. I mean, there's so much unknown. Inflation is still around. Election year is coming up. Who knows if recession's ever really going to hit or not? We just don't know. The stock market fell 2,000 points in the last 2 weeks, but I think today was up a little bit. It's just really a weird world after COVID with the forced government shutdown of the economy, plus the trillions of dollars thrown in the economy. We don't know, but history has shown that we've done a good job of managing the city funds, and I think things are going well in the city. So everything is healthy for the general fund, the enterprise funds, and we think that the proposed budgets that we have for you tonight are a good representation of good stewardship and great opportunity to continue to serve our citizens well. So thank you for listening to me drone on. Thank you, Chair. I'll be much shorter when it comes to the URA message.
You will.
I promise.
Thank you, Ray. First off, I'm honored to serve in the role of chairman of your budget proceedings this year. And first off, we have a lot going on, so if you have a question, please, if you're online, please use the hand raise. And if you're in here, get my attention, throw something at me, whatever you need to do so we can make sure you get your questions answered. So you received the budget, and I know you probably didn't have any questions. I know I didn't. But at the end of the day, you know, it's $74 million of somebody else's money. And that's kind of how we have to look at it. And we look at it as we're the people that the citizens are expecting to do whatever needs to be done to make sure that it's being done the right way. And I think our staff does a great job, and I think they put a lot of work into the budget. But I know for me, there's things in here, I'm like, what the heck is that? And I've been doing this for a while. And if nothing else, it's not that I don't look at it like we're questioning staff or we don't trust staff. It's kind of like, what is this? My neighbor asked me, I want to be able to say, oh yeah, it's this, rather than I got no clue. Dial City Hall, see what they tell you. I don't think that's a great answer. So you've reviewed the budget. I'm guessing you have questions, and before we finish, I promise you, we will get all your questions answered, okay?
Can I add one more thing?
Yes,
So
you may.
far, we've gotten 63 questions that have been answered. If you haven't seen them, I have hard copies just in case.
Tonight we'll receive the budget message. Okay, we're gonna see the forecast, and we're gonna go through a little recap of what's going on presently and what we expect to be happening in the future. Then we're going to deliberate the budget. And our job is to deliberate the budget, balance it, and we're gonna send it to council to be approved. Okay, they're the ones, that's the final say, it's a council. But what I'd ask the councilors is, please don't vote one way here and vote another way at council. But the citizens, you're here because you have the same vote as a councilor. Everybody's got one vote. And you're here to represent the citizens. Councilors are great, but you know, sometimes they're kind of in touch, sometimes they're not. But that's why we're here. And this is a lot of work in a short amount of time, and we're kind of sorry for that. I know I'm sorry for that, but it's the way it works out. And it's something that we have to do. End of the day, you know, yeah, this has got for me, it's a pretty big deficit. But I also understand history, and I understand the way that things have been done, and they've been done effectively. And the only thing I can say to kind of temper that maybe a little bit is, Ray and Eric are one bad encounter with a TriMet bus away from being somebody else. And they're very responsible, and I guess the question you have to ask yourself sometimes, would the next guy be? How would the next guy do? Because at the end of the day, we're basically putting the money into the bank account. And we're authorizing that it gets spent, and we just need to understand that. We're authorizing that the money gets spent. Whatever we appropriate can be spent. And will they spend it? Probably not. Might they spend it? Maybe. We just have to understand that. Because at the end of the day, what we're saying is there's $2,591 that cannot be spent. And that's kind of our little fail-safe position. We're trying to open things up so that there's more flexibility. And just what does that look like? You know, so we're kind of projecting about a 28%. Last couple of years, we've been about a 28% difference to the minus in what we're projecting. And if you look other years, it's less than that. So we're projecting more. We might need to project more, we might not need to project more. But it's just one of those things that we need to be aware of. And certainly, you know, it's not us versus them. Everybody's got a job to do. And our job is oversight. And that's why we're here, and that's what we need to do. End of the day, you know, there's, okay, what does it cost to provide the services? I think that's an important thing to our citizens, and I also think what we provide is important. That's what we're gonna be judged on. What we provide and how much it costs. I don't think most citizens really care much about the budget. That's why we're here, but they're gonna judge us on what the end result of all this is. How does it work? Is it sustainable? We're in a position on some things, as we read in the budget message, that they may not be sustainable. Expenses going like this, income going like this, how's that gonna work out? At some point, that's gonna be a problem. Sometimes we have to work through these things and figure out a way to go forward, because Christmas comes once a year and it's not always coming now. Meaning there may not always be something that's gonna give us more money. We might have to make tough decisions sometimes to figure things out. But it is very good to hear what our balances are. And depending on how that works, maybe we can abate some increases to folks. I don't know. We have to look at these things and then figure out what's gonna be best for everybody in the city. Okay, so we'll go through, we'll do presentations, and then there'll be points for questions, okay? And then as we get into debates, deliberating the budget, before we vote on anything, I'd like to make sure everybody's questions have been answered and everybody has a chance to say what's on their mind, okay? Because it's not his budget, it's our budget. It's not your budget. Dang, not even Eric's budget. But I really sincerely appreciate all the work that all of you have done to get to this point tonight, and all the work that staff has done. There's a lot to it, doesn't go unnoticed. Okay, does anybody have any questions before we turn it over to Eric Mueller? Keep going. You guys all good with the process and everything? Roger,
Yes, sir, Chair.
all right. Pardon me?
I said, yes, sir, Chair. Here, here.
Okay, Mr. Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. See if I can get this to launch here. Okay, well, we've got those taken care of. Tonight, what we need to accomplish, the local budget law has a number of regulatory requirements. We've done the required publications in the Gresham Outlook, and we have some obligations that we have to ensure we accomplish tonight, because that's what we published in the paper. We'll go through some of the local budget law requirements here in a moment. There's the budget message, there's public comment on the budget we need to take tonight, whether we have any or not, depends year to year. We also published the notice of state share revenues hearing before the budget committee. It's one of the other items that we need to review tonight and allow for public comment on state share revenues, which in the 15 years I've been doing it, we haven't had any, but you never know. So, and then we need to do some of the same things for the Urban Renewal Agency. Technically, as it's a separate agency, it requires a separate budget. We have sort of the same regulatory requirements, although we don't have the state share revenue piece to do. So that is the process piece. And let me switch over to, if I can find it. Okay, Budget Committee responsibilities. Those of you who've been on the Budget Committee, you've seen this before, but something we cover each year for the changeover, as well as that, you know, this isn't a committee that meets every month. Why do we do it this way? The local budget law requires that a proposed budget, which is what you have in the books that were delivered to you and before you, is what's prepared by city management. The Budget Committee considers it, evaluates it, changes it if necessary. They then produce what is referred to in the budget law as an approved budget. Then there's a whole bunch of additional publications and forms that have to be filed, publications in the newspaper, and then a public hearing before the City Council in June, when the budget then is formally adopted, which then becomes the document that staff manages through the course of the year. So the practical goal of the Budget Committee is to produce an approved budget from this proposed budget. So why do we do it this way? It's because of the local budget law. It's ORS Chapter 294. It's about 36 pages of fine print and lots of detail. Those of you who've been on the committee, I've given you copies of this before. Anybody that is new to the committee or hasn't gotten a copy, I'm happy to give you one. It's great insomnia therapy, but have copies here for you. This one is actually one of the better ones written because it helps focus on what the budget committee's role is. This is the 9 steps that they categorize things in. The budget committee is right smack dab in the middle, steps 4 and 5. There's a bunch of process that occurs before we get to tonight, and there's a bunch of things that have to occur after the budget committee approves the budget. So this is what they refer to in the document as the simplified budget process, which always cracks me up. That's the simplified process. But in any case, budget committee, again, is right there in the middle of the process. It's a critical role. Can't go forward without it. It's not a rubber stamp. It's for the budget committee to evaluate the priorities, the reasonableness of what's being presented by management. Does it line up with what community priorities are? It's not the responsibility of the budget committee to work on spreadsheets or calculate numbers or so forth. It's all that is what staff is supposed to do and get put into the budget for you. The budget committee many times has not changed the budget. That really depends on how in tune staff is with the priorities of the council and the budget committee. I always get asked about the local budget law training. Again, purposes of the local budget law is established by that ORS Chapter 294, established standard procedures for all local governments, outline fiscal programs and policies. It's what's part of what's all contained in that budget book. Estimate resources and expenditures. Encourage citizen involvement. The budget committee is established in that ORS chapter, and it requires an equal number of citizens to the equal number of elected officials. It's something that the state statute requires. And it's to help ensure control of the expenditure of public funds. It's 4 phases: the proposed budget, which we brought, approve the budget, which is what your process will be, adopt the budget, and then there's post-budget adoptions. What the budget is, it's a financial plan for 1 year. It's not 15 years of history. It's not 20 years forecasted in the future. It's a plan for 1 fiscal year. It's estimates of revenues and expenditures, not guarantees, not promises. It's estimates. The actuals will then get audited and get reported to the council as a result of the audit process that occurs afterwards. But the budget is the basis for appropriations. As Ray mentioned, it provides for the funding that staff may spend. It's a authorization to spend, not an obligation to spend. So again, just because the money is there doesn't mean it will be spent. Budget committee approves the budget in phase 2. Again, it's the equal number of governing body and appointed citizens of the jurisdiction. Can't be officers, agents, or employees of the jurisdiction, staggered 3-year term. As Tanny mentioned, all members have the same vote. So duties are to receive the budget document, which check, you've done that. Hear the budget message, which is what's coming. Consider public comment, if there is any public comment. Discuss and revise the budget as needed. Approve the budget, and also very critically, approve the property tax levies for both the general permanent rate as well as for the bond. That's something else that's required in statute. That's not done by the budget committee. It can't go to the council and ultimately can't go to the county assessor. So the budget message prepared, explains the budget, describes financial conditions, changes, must be in writing, anyone can deliver it. Budget committee process, all meetings are public meetings and open to the public. You know, this was posted and advertised, as I mentioned, in compliance with the local budget law. It's available for, of course, anyone to attend in person or now in Zoom. The budget document was made available as it was distributed to the committee. Quorum's required to conduct business, which is why we made sure we established that up front. Majority of the committee required to take action, and committee can request and receive additional information from district or city officials. Hear public comment is one of your duties. It's based on us having complied with the budget law notice requirements, which we did, which is why we need to make sure we cover that tonight. Because I couldn't get another one published in time to comply with the budget law before our next meeting. So we'd have a problem if we couldn't get to it. Any member of the public may speak. It's to be public comment on things related to the budget, not general city interest items. Approve the budget, it's recorded, approve the tax levy, and then the budget committee has completed its work for that cycle. It's basically that step 4 and 5 that I mentioned earlier on. Phase 3, bunch of publications have to occur in May, and the budget goes to the city council in June. They adopt the budget, make appropriations, impose the levies, and then more paperwork is filed with the county assessor. Changes after the budget is adopted, that's what occurs during the course of the year. If there are changes that are necessary to the budget, staff comes to the city council, and this year, just like every year, I will be bringing year-end budget adjustments to the council at the second meeting in June to deal with all of the things that occurred that were different than what we planned 15 months earlier, that the actual turned out to be a bit different. So that's the high-level overview. Those of you who just really love the stuff, there's 112 pages of a budgeting manual that's really more designed for staff. Goes on and on. I get asked, well, what's missing in the 6-hour class? Well, it's basically all those other steps of 1 through 3 and 6 through 9, all the other details. And that's just a quick snapshot of all the other slides that I won't drag you through that are prepared by the Department of Revenue on the local budget law. So again, the duties are receive the document, hear the budget message, consider public comment, discuss and revise the budget, approve property taxes. So again, critical role, part of the process, not a rubber stamp by any means. It evaluates and proposed budgets, whether they're changed or not, depends on how in tune we are. Any questions about the local budget law process and why we have to do it this way? Okay.
Counselor White.
Yeah, I had one question on the cover letter we got in the packet. It was talking about how we shouldn't talk to other members, but I believe we can talk to other members as long as it's not over a certain number. Just like counselors can talk to each other as long as there's not more than 3.
Well, conversing gets to be a gray area with I guess the intent in the local budget law is that the deliberations, which would be considering and discussing whether you think something should be funded or not funded, increased or not increased, strays into what the local budget law expects to have occur in a public meeting. So it depends on the nature of the conversation, and so I don't want to say, no, you can't, if Tanny happened to be the one that delivered the budget to your house, and one of those folks who's not that you can't chat with him briefly, but you guys shouldn't sit and go through individual funds and talk about individual expenditures, because then you're doing the process that's supposed to be done as part of the committee. But that's, like I say, it's a little bit of a gray.
Cannot deliberate any line item outside of a public meeting.
Thanks for that clarification.
Mr. Barney?
I guess just a quick point of clarification. You had that slide with the 9 steps listed on it, and it said like DOR. I was just wondering what does that mean?
Department of Revenue, I'm sorry, yeah, they're the state agency that oversees the local budget law administration based on the statute.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay,
Mr.
well.
Wilcox?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Eric, I have a question on the public notice. It's in the Outlook. So is that refer people to City Hall if they want a copy of the budget.
I don't know if I have that in front of me. I don't have it memorized by any means, but it does point people to City Hall for available to look at it, and we deliberately make sure we have a printed copy, what we refer to as the lobby copy, on file with Kelly.
Okay, that's fine now.
All right, we'll dive into the next part of the regulatory process here and see if we can't get going on the budget message. So, management's proposed budget, economic outlook, one of the items, lots of cross currents in the economy, not much different than it has been for a year. Things going up, things going down. We've got strong employment, we've got inflation, we've got Federal Reserve interest rate going up or going down. Housing and the question about recession. Lots of economic push and pull from supply and demand issues. GDP has come out stronger over the course of the year than what was expected a year ago. Last year ended up being stronger than what was expected. First quarter is looking to firm up as well. So the economy, whereas it was expected was going to slow down in the second half of last year as a result of the Federal Reserve's actions, it has continued to chug along. This is a shorter term chart showing more of the components. Sort of the key point to notice there is the purplish part of that bar is what's referred to as the personal expenditures component, and that's essentially consumer spending, which again reinforces the general rule of thumb, and that is that 2/3 of the economy is the consumer spending. The Conference Board's current forecast is they do not forecast a recession for 2024. Unlike a year ago where they forecast a recession in the second half of 2023. GDP in 2003 was 2.5. At the moment it's coming forecasted at 2.2. The prior forecast was at below 1. So it was going to be 0.9 to 1. Leading economic indicators from the Conference Board continue to show some upturn. The part of it is still in the negative territory, but the direction has changed consistent with the economy continuing to grow more so than what had been expected. Housing, another aspect of it, pending home sales, as you can see, as interest rates were raised, pending and new home sales declined considerably. Part of that is directly a reflection of mortgage rates. As you can see here, it peaked back last fall, well above 7%. It's come down to a, really affordable 6.8. Let's just run out there and sign up for 30 years of payments at that. Nevertheless, that certainly impacts the economy. Moderation impact in the Troutdale housing market. 479, 500. The numbers are a little bit tough to rely on because the pool is so small, because there's been a lot fewer activities, so it becomes more difficult to calculate a reliable number, but we're not seeing a dramatic fall in housing prices, but we're seeing a significant slowdown in terms of the volume of transactions. Many people who have those 3.5%, 4% mortgages have decided they'd rather stay in the house they're in than move to a bigger one or another one where they have to pay that 6.8% mortgage. So it's causing a slowdown in the activity. This is the buying and selling conditions. As you can see, the dramatic drop in essentially affordability and availability is represented by the buying conditions. The rent inflation, or the rent rate, which factors into the housing component of inflation, peaked in early 2023. About a year ago, it's continuing to come down, which is going to be helpful on the inflation front. On the employment side, we're at 4.2, not necessarily a 30-year or 40-year record low, but very low historical wise. From the the peak of the pandemic to now the recovery and so forth. There's still leisure hospitality is still behind in terms of recovering the jobs, but there's been growth in a number of other areas. The year-over-year changes in wages and salary as the from 2020 through 2023, that's been necessary, particularly given the inflation impact. So wage growth annual percentage, you see the dramatic drop impact of the pandemic, the recovery, and then it's sort of to moderate somewhere around the 4+ to 5% most recently. So the labor market continues to be cyclically strong in terms of, and to be structurally tight in terms of availability of workers and over availability of jobs for them to fill. Inflation continues to rocket high. As you can see, that very unpleasant June of 2022, 9.6 high. You can see it's come down considerably since then, but it's still well above the Fed's 2% target. You can see the peaks back there. It's come down, half of that, but it's still above where we would like to be. Kind of shows it a little bit smoother. We've come down, but we're starting to see a slow uptick there on the far end. This chart again shows a long history, shows the great inflation back in the 70s and 80s. Comparison-wise, what we had recently is not anywhere near that bad. However, it is certainly far greater than it had been in the previous 25 years that we were experiencing. The little box with the last 12 months, I think, is important to note that it's continuing to slope down, but it's not dropping rapidly. One of the articles I was reading, I forget who it was, that they said it was a famous quote of prices rocket up and they float down like a feather. And so we're slowly seeing the inflation come down. The PCE is the Fed's preferred measure. Again, it shows something similar. Again, showing that downward slope. It doesn't get the same headline attention as the CPI for a number of reasons, but it's a closer metric for what they look at. Inflation is also very much a personalized experience because of the components that are involved in the CPI measure in terms of how it's weighted. Of course, the largest one is housing. So if you happen to be a renter who's renting and changing locations and you're coming up across the increased rent rates, you're experiencing a significant increase. Unlike if you happen to be one of those fortunate folks who, is 5 years into their 3.5% 30-year mortgage, well, the fact that the housing component is going up is not really affecting you because your housing part of the inflation basket is not being affected. However, you may be more affected by gasoline if you commute to Salem every day for your job or something. So the point is that the inflation metric shows a large aggregate, but it still is going to be an individualized experience based on your spending in each of those weighted components. So the inflation trend is that it's slowly downward. We're continuing to see a shift from goods to services, and part of the challenge there is that the services component isn't slowing down any, which is also continuing to push on the inflation metric. The labor continues to be constrained. Supply chains have pretty much improved. The inflation peaked in June of 2022. Now, the consumer, the sentiment index, this is a monthly, it's a survey. There's a couple of them that are done, so they are anecdotal. They are the opinions or the feelings of the survey responders. The University of Michigan survey, sentiments basically move sideways. Slight uptick in inflation expectations, frustration that inflation slow down, the reduction in inflation, that has petered out or slowed down. It hasn't continued to decline. And then they're also expressing more apprehension about the future in light of the election, some of the world events related to conflicts and so forth, creating some pessimism a bit there. Another one of the surveys is the Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index. Continues to improve, but they became more pessimistic about the future. Their current circumstance they feel fairly good about, but they're pessimistic about as they look forward. They're concerned and about elevated price levels, even though the rate of increase may have moderated out. The cost of things is still here. It's not going up, but it hasn't come down. It's flattened out. They're concerned about the political environment. Again, that's kind of coloring people's perspective on things. So the index, the present situation is the black line up above. They feel fairly good about their present situation. They're pessimistic about the future to a larger degree. Whether it's really pessimism or whether it's uncertainty, given that so much may change depending on the election, it may be a bit more of just the unknown that's bothersome rather than any particular item. However, their perception or their expectation about that recession that was supposed to arrive in the second half of 2023, you can see that they continue to have a declining expectation of it arriving, which has been accurate. But on the small business side, the small business owners, it's their lowest level of optimism since 2012. Excuse me. Inflation has been, they're reported as their top business problem, as well as the labor market component has been a challenge, and it's only eased a little bit for them. Inflation and the higher input costs and labor costs are their biggest challenge. You can see they're continuing to tick down. They're significantly below on the pessimism side. So wages are rising, jobs are plentiful, but nobody's happy, and it's because everybody's both, well, not everybody, but most everyone is both a consumer and a worker, and so they're getting things on both sides. America is, as one of the research articles I saw, their vibe session, wages are up, but they're more offset by inflation. CPI inflation peaked at 9.1, but it's fallen to 3.5, significant drop. But it doesn't explain all the unhappiness. There's political polarization, there's the global conflicts and wars. Workers are getting more time off and flexibility. In the post-COVID world, the environment's changed a little bit in that regard, so there's greater job satisfaction based on the surveys. The inflationary periods, both prices and wages tend to rise, as we looked at that earlier chart of wage increases, but people tend to dwell more so on the cost rather than that they got a raise, and so they feel worse. Again, it's that vibe session aspect, which colors people's perspective. So, one nice side benefit of the eclipse is that, we've got folks that can reuse their glasses. So, the recession, the recessions have three different aspects generally: depth, diffusion, and duration. But the question is, what recession? A year ago, the expectation again was the second half of last year. Headline of something I just saw today that I cut and pasted in there: GDP growth isn't cooling off after all. Expect more jobs, more inflation, and fewer rate cuts, from the economic house over at Wells Fargo. The prior speculation of the economists that the Fed was going to engineer a soft landing has basically been, the argument now is that there's not going to be a landing. Or it may be a bit like the pilots that do the touch and go. They don't actually land. Both inflation and GDP are continuing to tick upward. If there's a recession, the current soft landing, no landing is that it's going to be pretty mild. And the inflation expectations There's, in the labor market, because it's so tight, there's been a lot of evidence of what's referred to as labor hoarding, where in a different environment, companies may have downsized because it's been so hard to hire qualified people. They're reluctant to let them go, even if they start to see sales slow a bit. So that's continued to have the labor market tight, as well as keep pressure on wages. So the Federal Reserve, I mean, their intent or their tool on the monetary policy side is to increase rates, which creates what they refer to as demand destruction, increasing unemployment and lowering wage inflation, results in higher mortgage rates, cooling the housing market. Well, really, only that last one has occurred. It certainly has cooled the housing market in terms of transactions and activity because the mortgage rates are so high, but we really haven't seen the demand destruction occur, haven't seen the unemployment rise, and the wage inflation is still there, which has led some economists to start to speculate that the Fed's next rate move won't be a cut, but another hike, which is sending tremors around the bond market and folks in the stock market, that if inflation continues to tick upward over the next couple of months, they may be in the prospect of having to do another increase, again, to try and tap on the brakes to get the economy to slow down, to get inflation to slow down. Remains to be seen. The chair says that the committee is data dependent, and a lot of the Fed speakers continue to reiterate that. We'll have to wait and see. So, economic summary, the recession of 2023 never arrived. Inflation is slightly slowing. Cost levels remain elevated. You know, we're not seeing us go back to $2 a gallon gasoline, but it's no longer rising towards $6 a gallon either. Supply chains have generally recovered, but running at capacity. The wars risk disruption in some of those supply chains, particularly on the agricultural front for Ukraine, and a whole range of shipping related to around the Middle East and the attacks along in the Red Sea. Labor market remains very tight and is the single biggest constraint on really the GDP growth. The biggest risk factor is the outlook remains the persistently high inflation. So Conference Board, you know, views 2024 strong footing that started out with rising consumer debt and elevated interest rates, which interest rates on car loans, on mortgages, on credit cards do not factor into CPI. So even though they are affecting people's monthly pocketbook, it doesn't get reflected in the number. While they do not forecast a recession in 2024, they're expecting that slowdown from the second half of 2023 to show up in the second half of 2024. We'll see. Of course, there's a number of factors that can throw the forecast off: the elevated inflation, the high interest rates, whether the pandemic savings will ever actually be exhausted, the rising consumer debt, as I mentioned. So, economic growth slowly slows, if it does slow. Supply chains have recovered, consumer demand for services remain. In fact, the latest CPI numbers basically showed that on the goods side, it was pretty much generally flat. What was driving the increase was on the services side. One of the areas in particular was insurance, both homeowners and automobile insurance. Homeowner side is being impacted by the wildfires that occurred on the West Coast and the hurricanes in the East. There's a number of large insurance companies that are pulling out of Oregon. There's a number that have already pulled out of California because of all the wildfires, because they can't make money with all of the losses. California is looking at potentially some crisis problems where they can't get insurance for homes in certain counties in Northern California. State's going to have to intervene with one of their programs, but in Oregon, it's starting to have an effect from the wildfires in the southern part of the state where insurers are pulling out because the losses were too great. On the auto insurance side, one of the challenges with the more sophisticated, more electronically enabled vehicles is that the repair costs are more. It's no longer just a bent up sheet metal fender, it's, you know, a camera and a sensor and a backup camera and a GPS locator and so everything else that got crunched when that fender got hit. And so the repair costs have gone up dramatically for cars in the last several years, which is driving up the auto insurance rates. In the last basket, there was a 22% increase year over year on auto insurance rates, which is part of what driving that monthly increase. I digress there. So the Federal Reserve may have avoided the recession. So with that, I'll stop.
Okay, Mr. Brandt?
On this unemployment rate, I find it deceiving to say the least. And all this gibberish and talk about how the unemployment rate is so low. I think a lot of that is a result of the dramatic reduction in employee participation rate. And tons of people that used to work have fallen off and are no longer counted as unemployed. So there's a ton of people not working. I mean, a ton of people not working. And so that inflation, that unemployment rate is understated substantially, in my opinion, because the employee participation rate is so low. So high. Nobody's working. So I think it's a very deceptive thing for any of these people to put on these and try to say, yeah, the unemployment rate is so great unemployment. Well, it's because people aren't working and they fall off. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but they fall off that rate. And a lot of the new jobs are taken by part-time people who are working additional part-time jobs just to keep up with inflation and other added expenses, from utilities to fuel to housing to credit to everything else. So they're not jobs that new people are coming on to reduce increase the participation rate. It's actually current employees working and taking additional jobs just to survive. Which has led obviously to a huge credit card debt in this country, the highest it's ever been on record. And people getting into the retirement accounts. The economy is, to me, in far worse shape than what these quote unquote authorities are stating, in my opinion. It is not a good outlook, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Glantz?
Yeah, I had a question. In an earlier meeting today, we heard about how the Port of Portland is going to close the container shipping. And they were talking a little bit about why. And they said it had to do with during COVID, everything was great, but then as COVID went away, people stopped purchasing things the past year to 18 months, and they were operating at a deficit. And so my question is, do you see that maybe the local economy is different from some of the national economy? I know from personal experience, it seems like Oregon is always a little late to the party, where a recession hits and now it's 6 months before it really hits us, then it takes us 6 more months to get out of it than the rest of the country. And I know that Fairview is building a whole bunch of distribution centers. Is that we don't have things to distribute, that gonna have any kind of ripple effect?
Well, certainly Oregon, experiences things at a varying degree over the national economy. Different factors were ahead and others were behind on. The overall aggregate is that there was a huge run-up in shift of spending during COVID from services to goods, because people couldn't travel, couldn't even go to get a haircut. You couldn't spend money on services. So they shifted to spending money by clicking on things on Amazon or heading over to Lowe's or Home Depot and working on, home improvements rather than traveling. That, as COVID has passed, the shift has come, the shift of spending balance, or relative ratio of how much on goods, how much on services has started to shift back, or has more than started, has shifted back more so onto the services side, a lot of pent-up demand. And so, yeah, there well may be excess capacity that was built for distribution. Amazon, I believe, canceled several different warehouses that they had intended to open based on how things were going during the pandemic, because the spending on the goods side subsided and started to shift back to the services side. That to me is consistent with what you heard from the Port of Portland, is that they're having less container shipping of goods, and so their container operation doesn't generate the sufficient volume to be profitable.
Thank you.
Okay.
I
Mr.
just
Allen?
wanted to mention, I'm seeing the same thing on the transportation side, so I can echo what Eric Mueller is saying there. And then if you look at his slides, it was showing manufacturing down, right, where food services was up. So the data also corresponds to what Eric Mueller was telling us, that less things are being bought and moved around and more services are being consumed right now.
All right. Okay, Mr. Miller?
All righty, we'll continue to charge forward if I can get this to relaunch. Come on, there we go. Okay, so proposed budget for 24-25, so citywide, all funds, 24-25, 73 million versus last year of 78. Materials and services, 16.7, increase of 1.4 million. Public works funds, capital improvement funds, debt service funds, and the general fund. There's all different types of funds in that big budget book that got delivered to you. So the operating funds, or the enterprise funds that Ray made some mention of earlier, and water, sewer, stormwater, the utility fund budgets, there's no rate increases proposed in this year's budget. The CIP update and the SDC rate change studies are in process. All of that feeds into the utility service cost analysis, and we're expecting that study to be completed over the course of the summer and come to the council with that analysis in the fall. Rate increases are going to be necessary, both because of ongoing inflationary costs related to all the materials and services that need to be consumed, as well as for the upgrades of the infrastructure necessary. Other funds that are composed in the budget are related to system development charges. There's the improvement set of funds for water, sewer, street, and stormwater. There's also the SDC reimbursement set of funds, again for water, sewer, street, and stormwater. Other public works funds, the internal services funds, where we have public works management and the engineering and project management group, and the public works equipment maintenance group. Utilities undergrounding fund, the bike path and trails fund, which is one that's we have to have based on state shared revenues that we'll get to here shortly. Street tree, the Parks Department is a division within the general fund managed by the Public Works team. Solid waste recycling is also another division in the Public Works, in the general fund. And the Parks Improvement Fund, or the Parks SDC Fund, which we have used traditionally as our internal bank to borrow from, which we did again during the current fiscal year. A couple of other funds, the Code Specialties Funds, where we administer all of the building inspection, building permits for electrical, for building and for plumbing. Sam Cox Building Maintenance Fund, or Improvement Fund, the Debt Services Fund, and the Full Faith and Credit Debt Service as well. So the capital outlay, which is proposed in the budget, the $12,715,000, $2 million or so is within the general fund, which we'll get to in some detail later. Page 18 in your budget, those of you, I know we've gotten questions, so I know several of you have read through it. The remaining 10 million of capital is budgeted across all those different funds that I just clicked through related to improvement funds and operations funds for infrastructure development. Again, as Ray mentioned, his silos, we can have money in the sewer improvement fund, but if we need to make an expenditure in the water improvement fund, we can't go borrow that money and use it or redirect it. It has to be used for its particular infrastructure. So we have those funds budgeted in each of those areas for their own projects. General obligation bond, the refunding bonds, debt service paid for the police facility that we're in. There's continue to have the 175 from the lease revenue transferred to the debt service fund, which lowers the levy. The full faith and credit, the $5 million that we borrowed to be able to fund the cleanup, the purchase of the property and the cleanup of the URA site, $5 million, it's zero. The budget that you folks approved a year ago, that the council then adopted last June, provided for that payoff, and that payoff occurred this past December. And then the other part of the full faith and credit fund is the $1.5 million that the city borrowed to complete the cleanup of the URA site. And we borrowed it from Business Oregon from their Brownfields Redevelopment Fund, 1.5 million, 7 years remaining, so $203,000 a year. The general fund, so general fund 2399, 24 million, adjusted revenues down 7%, appropriations down 7.2. Big chunk of that was the $1.5 million of revenue we got in this year and 1.5 million of revenue of expenditure that we had out this year related to the Urban Renewal Agency, an activity that we won't repeat, in this coming cycle, so it's not there. Estimated $2,097,000,000. Revenues $7,423,000, net increase of just over $1 million. And I think I had some very confusing language in some of the documents, so I apologize for confusing folks on the property taxes. So the estimated projected, I want to be clear on that, as well as this year isn't sorted out yet. I think that's where this year is going to come in, but I won't know until we get through the entire cycle. The 15.9 is based on, again, estimate. We'll have to see what the county assessor does. Proposed budget does include $3 million in contingency like it has for the last couple of years. We had it in this past year in the expectation that we would need to do something related to the folks that were, we had the exclusive negotiating agreement with for the urban renewal site. They've gone on pause for now, but we expect to be revisiting marketing the site come the first of the year. So we continue to have that money there should there be a need for something related to that project, which of course it would be involve the council and the URA board. Again, as Ray said, we can't spend a nickel of that $3 million without a council approval. So the general fund revenue of 15.4, general fund expenditures of 21, preliminary deficit of 6 million, just basically pretty close to the same numbers as this year's projection was. So preliminary deficit, we add back the 3 million of contingency. We have a spend down of the general fund balance of 3 million, which is essentially what we forecast to do this year on various projects, but won't essentially achieve that for a variety of capital projects. Whoops, come on here, my clicker isn't. So we had beginning fund balance, the 10.8 million that Ray had mentioned, revenues, expenditures, preliminary net, we ending fund balance for this year, we're expecting to be this 8,700,000. That's the number I plugged into the budget for the beginning fund balance for next year, so that's the number up at the top. And the sharp-eyed eyes of you would notice that I'm $2,150 difference in the numbers, and it's a impress fund related to postage that rolls into some numbers and doesn't roll into others, and drives me nuts. So I have to find it in the spreadsheets, but we didn't lose the money, it's just, anyway. Again, same calculation, so estimated ending fund balance, 5.6 million. So I was gonna say famous, not really famous chart, but reoccurring chart, that bring in every year. And you'll notice that history where it grew greatly, some of what, Ray was talking about in his opening comments, where we had significant revenue in excess of expenditures in a particular year, and of course that excess then ends up rolling into that ending fund balance. So there we are at that 10.7. I've got that 8.7 is what I'm forecasting for this year, and then the 5.6 is what is in the budget. So in summary, it's the increased labor costs are still subject to the negotiation with ASME. We go through this process every 3 years where we have labor contract negotiations. In the past 15 years, I've never had it get done before July. Maybe this year, because the union wanted to start much earlier this year, so we started negotiations a couple months sooner than we normally do. But the normal pattern is we'll end up coming to the council in September, October to ratify a collective bargaining agreement. And then sometime after that, I'll get the numbers worked up and a budget adjustment brought to the council to adjust for whatever the contract then that is approved. So the numbers there are not COLA increases included in the budget, just like there aren't every 3 years. So sort of the overall framework, continuity, continue to maintain reliable services, look through the near-term disruption of is inflation going up, is inflation going down, are we gonna have a recession, we're not gonna have a recession, we're gonna break out, is it not gonna break out, how's the election gonna turn out, all of that we're trying to look through and continue to work on goals. Of course, the urban renewal area is sort of the high visibility one. And I think as Ray had reported at a recent city council meeting, we were fortunate enough to finally get approval from the railroad, so we hope to actually be able to have some visible activity related to the trail, which of course will then generate expenditures later this spring and this summer. So we expect the economy will slow over the remainder of the year into 2025. I don't expect, again, a recession, but slow. Maintain essential services, invest in infrastructure, accomplish the city's goals and objectives. So with that, I think that's pretty close to the end of my, is the end of my official budget message delivery and for that item on the agenda. So, Mr. Chair.
Okay, questions on the budget message? Mr. Bent?
Yeah, Ray, what happened to that developer for the URA? Why did he bail out?
One of the capstone's conditions for wanting to move forward with the development is getting Time Equities, the owner of the mall, to cooperate with them. And so Capstone and the city cooperated really hard to get Time Equities to talk, to play ball, to kind of come with a mutually beneficial. I mean, I think it would have been a gold mine for them if they followed through with what Capstone wanted to do. But at the end of all that effort, they ended up by sending a appropriate letter from their attorney says, blow off and never come ask us again. And so Capstone, based upon that response, said, we love you guys, we love the property, but that was kind of a linchpin to us moving forward. So we're going to step back. If things change in the future, let us know. And so they gave that report at the January meeting, I think, of joint meeting, the TCAB and the council.
Jeez. My wife goes down to that outlet mall quite a bit for various reasons, and she mentioned that it's under new management. as far as the individual management people there.
Yeah.
And a lot of tenants aren't very happy with what's going on.
They moved from Woodmont to North Biggs, I think. And if you look, at least 1/4 of the stores have been empty for a couple of years.
Yeah, so, I mean, it doesn't look very promising. Also, one other question for you, Ray. You mentioned that the addition of the management of Metro 62 acre College Nature Park at Beaver Creek. Is Metro either subsidizing or reimbursing us for that management?
No. Eric, now be nice. No, they say, hey, we own this property, if you guys wanna make it look nice for your citizens, you can take care of it. So we do. And that park essentially is from this corner of Stark and Troutdale Road, the southwest corner, that portion which goes probably about 200 or 300 feet to the south, and then to the Beaver Creek is that section that's taken care of. Everything south of that, the college owns, and just let's go. Yeah, no, they figure they're being nice enough to allow us to maintain it, which it is. We maintain and take care of it for our citizens.
Thank you.
Councilor Lance?
Yes, understand. The 3 million contingency is for, and the 2.6 million is what we need to have in reserves in order to build until the next main financing, correct?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit there on the second part of your question. I'm sorry, what was that?
The second part is the 2.6 million. It's 2,591,000. That is money that we need to hold on to in order to have money to pay the bills as the budget years switch over, correct?
Right, yeah, it's essentially like working capital or carryover funds. Different terms are used, but it's basically provides the funding to pay for all of our activities, payroll and so forth, till property tax revenues start to come in November, which then dramatically refill things.
And so then we don't have a true contingency. Why would we have the URA money not earmarked someplace as such rather than as contingency?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean.
In the general fund, do we not have a contingency for things that aren't already earmarked?
Right, that's the 3 million.
Was URA.
Well, that's just one of the more obvious possibilities. It could be used for any purpose that the council would approve. There was not a $3 million item that we knew we would likely need to spend for the URA. It's just, normally we have about a $2 million contingency if you go back to pre-COVID world in the general fund. And so we bumped it up so that if we needed to do something which we didn't quite know we might need to do with Capstone, we had some additional elbow room.
Thank you.
Mr. Bennett, you had a question?
No, I answered the question.
Okay.
Ray answered the
Okay.
questions.
All right, I just want to make sure we were good over there. Ms. Timmerman?
I have a question for Ray. Do the department heads, are they asked to submit a budget cut? Do they go through a budget cut process at any point in time? When I was with Portland, all of our departments were requested to provide a budget cut packet, and then they would also have ad packets so that there was some flexibility.
Don't take this wrong.
Oh,
But
I'm
comparing with the city of Portland, how they handle their finances.
I know.
Let's see, the difference between a mature adult and a child, to compare them to our budget. Because they have significant holes in their budget. I mean, their transportation department, their roads, they're cutting people, their permit department, they cut like 72 people this year already. They're suffering a lot. Actually, every department starts with the last year's budget, and, you know, and as a department head is here sitting in the back of the room, and he could probably tell you, Public Works in particular. But they look at and see what we asked for last year, what we spent last year, and where do we think we might have more expenses, like costs going up. Like last year, we had to anticipate inflation and a lot of things going up. And so they would add those costs. When it comes to cut, it's when I or Eric see something come in, we're kind of going, I don't think we really should spend money on that. I guess that's where the cuts come from, right there. So we haven't been in a situation where we've had to make, and honestly, just philosophy-wise, I absolutely oppose anybody who says 10% across the board will cut budgets, because that makes all the budgets the same value, which is completely silly. We have not had to do that because we have done so good a job of spending. And I make sure that staff all understand, you never have to justify spending less in your budget to get the same amount for the next year. I will never say to a department head, hey, you only spent $500 of $1,000 budgeted, I'm only gonna give you $500 for the next year. I say, why did you spend less? Why do you think you're gonna need $1,000 again? And we say, okay. So I guess generally speaking, we just look at things that are like, maybe we really shouldn't afford those next year. But they've always been really good in their submissions to understand that we only ask for increases in budgets where there's a particular need for inflation and things like that.
Ms. Russo?
On page 11, in the first paragraph, it says that state and local gas taxes have been modestly increased. Can we increase our gas tax?
That's not a vote, right? Our gas tax, would that not take a vote?
Yes. Well, what I mean by they've been modestly increased, not the tax rates, but the projected amount that we would be receiving. So no, we didn't increase the rate of the local gas tax. That was something that was approved at the ballot and implemented. It's remained the same.
And on page 27, for our new parks person, it had from 2.5 to 3.0, shouldn't that be 3.5?
Well, the parks and facilities workers are split between parks and facilities on where their salaries are allocated. So that's,
So he's gonna be
it's a half in each.
half in each, right?
Yeah.
Councilor Glantz, did you have another question?
Got it.
Okay. We need to go to our next regulatory obligation for the evening. Okay, so one of the other items that we published and that we're required to accomplish as part of our compliance to the local budget law and so forth, and this more so with the requirements surrounding state shared revenues, a different ORS chapter. So 221 revenue sharing with the cities based on the requirements in the statute, multiple steps. One is that there is a public hearing before the budget committee. So that's what we'll get to here in the next agenda item, if there is anybody from the public, but we'll make that available. Subsequently, there has to be a public hearing before the city council, which is something we typically do just before the budget item, adopting the budget in the June council meetings. And the city council then adopts a resolution or two, I think I've got them combined now, but a resolution, one, that we have to establish that we're eligible as a city to receive state shared revenues, and then secondly, that we would elect to receive the revenues. Those are sort of the requirements that are necessary. To be eligible, we have to establish that we provide 4 or more of those services. We basically provide every one of them, so we fully qualify. State shared revenues, it's published and it's in your, of course, line items are in your budget. So on page 40 is the liquor tax, the cigarette tax, the general revenue sharing. The marijuana is zeroed out based on our moving forward with that ballot item. The gasoline tax does not come into the general fund, but it goes into the street fund. It's on page 150. And then, as I mentioned, the bike and trails fund, that is based on the state statute, is required to receive 1% of the state gas tax. And so that's what goes into that fund. And it's on page 237. So, questions on state shared revenues?
Hearing time.
Okay, so public hearing on the possible uses of state shared revenue before the budget committee. Well, there's a copy of the notice that so public hearing, business-like manner, 5 minutes per speaker. Comments need to be limited to comments about state shared revenues, not about any other city business. Public hearing 3 parts, anybody in the room, anybody on Zoom, and I don't believe Ken has received any written comments. So, and then following that, the chair closes the hearing on state shared revenues. So with that, I will stop sharing so that the chair can hold the public hearing on state shared revenues.
This time I'd like to open the public hearing on state shared revenues for fiscal year budget 2024-2025. And we'll open the hearing. And Ken, did you receive any comments? State shared revenues? Anyone online wishing to comment on state shared revenues? And anyone in chambers? No. Okay, at this time I'll close the public hearing on state shared revenues for this evening.
I don't recall ever hearing the comment.
I was gonna comment, that was Tammy's best gavel. I never heard that. Fine job,
That's
sir.
great. Well, it's a chance for the public to object to getting all that free money. And they haven't said so yet. Excuse me, I couldn't resist.
Okay. The next regulatory item is going to be very similar. So, public comment on the proposed budget. Not by any means the end of the discussion or the end of the process at all, but just that we formally have a public hearing allowing, or a public comment period rather, excuse me, on the proposed budget. Again, business-like manner, 5 minutes per speaker. Comments relative to the budget, not any other city-related business. It's a comment session, not a Q&A session, so somebody may or may not raise a comment that we may get to later on in the subsequent presentations or the next night. So again, 3 parts, written comments, Zoom in the room, and then close, and then we're done with that part of it. So, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, I would like to open the public comment period for this evening's budget meeting. And this is a public meeting on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-2025, and any citizen may speak to any item relative to the budget. We'll open that, and did you receive any comments? Okay. Anyone online wishing to speak to the budget? See none. Anyone in chambers wishing to speak? Okay, with that, we'll close the public comment period for this evening.
And traditionally, Mr. Chair, we usually take a break at this point and
Okay.
come back into the urban renewal meeting so that we can essentially do the budget message and the public comment on the urban renewal budget and fulfill that regulatory requirement, which is our final regulatory requirement that we published and that we need to meet tonight. So with that, I'll leave it to you.
Question is 8 minutes enough for a break?
Yes.
For everybody? Okay, we will recess and we will come back in at 7:45. Thank you. Good evening. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Budget Committee meeting for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale. Go ahead and call roll, please.
Chair Lauer.
Here.
Director Rittma.
Here.
Director Caswell. Director One.
Present.
Director White.
Here.
Director Bertrand.
Present.
Director Glantz.
Here.
Chair Stephenson.
Here.
Gene Bett.
Here.
Heidi Timberman.
Here.
Chris Barney.
Keith.
Paul Wilcox.
Here.
Victoria Rizzo.
Here.
Rich Allen.
Here.
Kevin Minkoff.
Here.
All right, thank you, Chair Stephenson. As I promised, I would keep this much shorter than before. There's not much to report other than the huge excitement that after almost 20 years of the URA being in existence, we are finally, next budget year, knock on phony wood here, we'll be building the trail. The waterfront park, 3 acres that the citizens have seen, dreamed about, probably by now forgotten completely all about. But that is going to be starting. We have all the bid documents ready to go. We just finished, as Eric said, the approval from Union Pacific Railroad. We now just have to finish up our contract with the railroad so they can watch over us, make sure we do it right. So that's really going to be exciting in the next fiscal year is that trail is going to be built that will, in town, start at the Depot Museum and work its way up to and hit the trail right at I-84. So that'll be fun to get that project done. It's about a $4 million project, and most of that money is, $2.7 million, as you probably remember, is being provided by other government agencies, which is very wonderful, so that we don't have to provide all of those fundings for that. So that's really nice to have, because the beauty that we have right now is even though the URA doesn't have a lot of money of its own, going back to the city, and we talked about how well the city's been doing the last couple of years, is that money's been able to be loaned to the URA to be able to do the things that we're doing, which has been good. And all that money will eventually get paid back as the property gets developed over the next 20, 30 years. We'll get returned, but being able to have the seed money from the city has been very helpful. The development that was mentioned earlier, it just ran into a roadblock with the owners of the mall, but other people are interested. Wood Development is the ones who were like second place when the TCAB reviewed them. They've heard about Capstone stepping back, and they've asked to talk to the TCAB. So I told our staff advisor on them, saying, great, go ahead, talk to TCAB. Couldn't hurt to talk to Wood to see what they're thinking about the property. So that's going to happen in May. So even though interest rates are high, inflation is still a factor, and it's an election year, we're still keeping up a conversation with developers out there. But right now, the focus for staff is going to be next year that we're going to focus on getting that trail done. Just doing estimates, we've got bid documents. It'll probably start sometime, hopefully July or August, and take about 6 to 8 months, is at least our expectation right now. Weather depending, of course, as we finish it up in a couple parts, but that's really exciting. But as I indicated, what makes municipal budgeting so fun is the relationship between the city and the URA. Because if you look at the general fund revenues in the proposed budget, if you just glance at the bottom line, you might have heard that, oh, now this year we get the $1 million from Amazon thrown into it. Property taxes that used to be community service fee. But if you look at our adopted budget for this current year, it shows is that we were supposed to have $25.5 million in total resources for the general fund, including the fund balance forward. But this next year, staff is saying we've only got roughly $24 million of revenue. Going, well, why is there literally a reduction in income? Well, if you look into the numbers, you'll find out that this budget year, we had income in the general fund of $1.5 million from the Parks Improvement Fund, which was passed through the city so we could then loan it to the Urban Renewal Agency so we could build the trail. So there's income in this current year budget that won't show up in next year's budget because we were simply a pass-through on it. The other part of the income in the general fund this year is we had $900 and some thousand for the community service fee. Well, of course, that's not going to be in there next year because they're going to pay their taxes. So you will see an elimination of that income in the income for next year. But we also didn't have that available to spend anyway because it was socked away into the debt service fund to pay off the $5 million loan this year. So if you look at the budget for this year versus the current year, it looks like our income for general fund our resources, because it includes the amount forward, the cash going forward, it shows we had resources of $25.5 million this year and only $24 million next year. But in reality, that's $2.5 million off because there was $2.5 million in this year's budget, community service fee and the loan to the URA, that wasn't available to spend for general fund expenses, passed through, we had to list it as income. So in reality, this next year, general fund income will be $1 million. Now, just if you understood half of what I mumbled through there, you'll realize the creativity that you have to have and the way things pass through municipal budgets, especially when you're associated with an urban renewal agency that doesn't necessarily have the income it's going to have someday because it hasn't been developed yet. So it's just exciting, though, that the agency does have a city backing it up that is very healthy financially, and we get to have that trail started next year, so that will be fun. So, Chairperson, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Young. The Urban Renewal Agency is kind of like that family member that is broke. You know, it's kind of what it reminds me of. The city takes care of loaning them money, and eventually they're going to pay us back in TIF financing. Right now, we're the ones that are making really all the financial decision for the agency itself. This is a great thing. It's not very often you get this much property in your core area that you can redevelop. And I applaud our city council and urban renewal agency for making the decisions that they've made over the years to get us to this point. A little bit of a hiccup. We thought we had a phenomenal plan that was going to go the distance, and right now we just don't have everybody playing ball in the same ballpark. So we're stepping back, reevaluating some things a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, this is going to be something that not only this group, but everyone in Troutdale is going to be proud of. Sometimes it just takes, just every once in a while in the city, it might take a little longer than you expect, and it might cost a little bit more than you expect. But I think eventually we're going to end up getting where we want to be. So with that, Mr. Mueller.
Okay, here we go, okay. So, separate budget, separate agency, all the same things we talked about in terms of budget committee duties, responsibilities, local budget law training. It's all the same as what we did for your city budget training. So, same whole bunch of slides that we went through, et cetera. We won't put you through all of that again. So, the budget message. 2006 was the agency was established, separate legal entity, which is why we go through this exercise of a separate budget committee, et cetera. Promote the optimal development in the area, mix of retail, recreation uses, vision plan. That's the boundaries of the site, in case anybody didn't know. Overhead of it, the Urban Renewal Agency as a financial structure has two funds, unlike the city's 28 budgets. Whoops, it seems to be rolling on its own here. Yeah, so Riverfront Development Fund, which is effectively the general fund, and the debt service fund, which is limited to the TIF, has 400,000 TIF-based, the 1.5 million from the Business Oregon loan, the 5 million debt that the city borrowed. The city paid off the external borrowers or external lenders, but the Urban Renewal Agency still owes the city that 5 million. As well as the 1.5 million that was loaned, et cetera. The Riverfront Development Fund requirements, that's, we have those monies budgeted both to support the trail development as well as potentially expenditures related to whether it's Capstone or someone else. Debt service fund, budgeting the resources that we believe would be available. It's operating on funds loaned from the city. There's provision for grants in the, for the trail from both the state and from Metro. And the additional loan from the city. The exclusive negotiating agreement is it's a little out of date. Grant funding opportunities, so the confluence, that's the site, the areas, the parcels 2 and tract A are where the trail would go, and the parcel 1 is what we would anticipate conveying at some point to a developer for redevelopment. The part of the trail graphics information that way back when Chris Damgan had put together as part of our early approach to Metro on the funding and the appeal of its connections to the 40-mile trail, the I-84 bridge across to the state park, et cetera. Sandy River Access Plan, which Metro funded, was for a multi-use trail. Provides for connectivity, links to the 40-mile loop, as I mentioned. This was back in 2011, I believe. Preliminary was 4.5. We're in that same ballpark. Materials, services for the economic consulting, development, and marketing, engineering, planning services to facilitate the site development. Capital projects for the coming years, the focus on the trail development and construction. URA debt, as I mentioned earlier, the 5 million was loaned from the city of the URA. The terms of the loan only require the URA to repay the city from the sale of real property. This money isn't to be repaid with TIF, and indeed can't be repaid with TIF. So when it was loaned, that was part of what was understood is based on how the transaction is structured with whoever the developer is, it's going to directly impact the URA's ability to repay the city. The 1.5 is the same structure. It's based on repayment of from the sale of property. The TIF is known as the tax increment financing. It's the other fund, the debt service fund. That is the amount, or that is the number that was in the adopted plan from 2006, the $7 million of maximum indebtedness. Really what the statute, it was the terminology that's used, really what the statute specifies, it's the maximum amount of principal that can be repaid from the division of tax. That is collecting tax revenue over the course of the development after it's developed. And so that's that $7 million cap. Debt repayment from the increment, funds are loaned to the general fund of the Urban Renewal Agency, but are repaid from the debt service fund from the collection of the TIF. Agency currently owes that 400,000 of the TIF-backed debt. It's going to go up from the additional 1.5 million that we're loaning this year to provide for the matching funds. The increment revenue, the increment values is estimated 11.8 million, resulting in about 167,000 is the estimate of the tax increment revenue that would come in that would be available to pay toward that 400,000. So the increment structure, the urban renewal agency or the urban renewal structure for TIF financing. You have a frozen base that's established when you first create the agency, which was in 2006. That stays. All the different taxing districts continue to get the same amount that they got the year prior to it being established. All the development that occurs over the course of the life of the URA, that additional value, which is the 11 million at this point that has grown since 2006, that all of the overlapping taxing jurisdiction rate comes to the Urban Renewal Agency. That's what generates the TIF funds to repay the debt. And then once all the debt's repaid, then all of that increment of value goes back to where the overlapping taxing districts get the full value. So the 15,072 per thousand, that's the consolidated permanent rate of all the different taxing districts within the levy code area. 242, I believe, is the area that the agency's in. Calculates out discounts, et cetera. So we get 400,000 that's TIF backed. We have 5 million that's non-TIF backed for the full faith and credit borrowing. The 1.5 million from the state brownfields fund, 6.9 million that the agency owes the city. It'll owe it another 1.5 million before this fiscal year is over. So repayment from the city, full faith and credit bonds, once the property is sold, and the state funding is a little bit, or the state bond is a little bit squishy as to, they may allow us to continue to pay on it even if we sell the property. They may require us to pay it off. It's sort of going to depend on the timing and the sequencing of it. Either way, the city is the obligator of that debt to the state agency, the brownfields fund. So again, the URA would have to borrow more money to do development incentives, et cetera. The money would have to come from the city because the Urban Renewal Agency just doesn't have the financial capacity for an external lender to lend to it. So may have to borrow again. 4.8 million remains of that 7 million. It's going to drop to the 3.3 following this budget with the 1.5. We have until 2026 to incur that maximum amount of indebtedness. We have beyond 2026 to repay it, but it has to be incurred by that date. Oops. As this thing keeps advancing on me. There we go. Anyway, slowly repaid from the increment until we can get some development on there, and then there is that increased assessed value. That $15 per thousand would generate TIF revenue in a hurry, which would then facilitate the ability to pay off the debt, which would then be able to have the agency closed down. And then all that revenue would come to the overlapping districts. You got it in your places around the table. The error that when I printed the budget, the columns were labeled 25-25 rather than 24-25. So that handout that's at your places, the budget numbers are all identical. There's no change in those from what's in your bound book. It's just the label of the columns, but I wanted to make sure that we had that on record. So the proposed budget supports the plans to continue moving forward, construction of the trail, and preparing for the promising development project. We'll see that on in the future. The belief is the trail will also improve the curb appeal, as it were, for potential developers. So I guess we'll go back to questions, and then we can, from there, proceed to public comment. So any questions, Mr. Chair?
Any questions for staff? Councilor White.
I saw on the Sandy River access plan, are you talking about the linear part on that?
Yeah, the Sandy River access plan was the first concept of the park and the trail, yeah.
And then, can you go to the aerial photo of the site?
Sure, let me.
Because Ray did something very smart, you know, he focused on getting approval for, I think what they call Drover's Trail right behind the caboose area. Working with the railroad's rather difficult, and that's a big accomplishment to get that.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So with that being done though, and since we've got a hard no from the factory outlet mall, I think we should put some money aside to, you can see that where it says UPRR, Union Pacific Railroad.
Right there?
Yeah, and then that kind of point on that laydown yard they have there.
Right, their maintenance yard, yeah.
I guess the idea would be to try to negotiate with them to move that, and then we could have another access point or kind of a circular driveway type of approach. You gotta be wise, you know.
Both ways around the outlet mall is what you're getting at.
Yeah. And
I will just say historically wise, Councilor White, we did that a couple of years ago. We appraised the property to 2 acres. I even said, you know, how about, because there's 2 acres there, along 2 acres, and the east 1 acre is almost never used. When we cleaned up that property, I had a 2-year time-lapse video of everything going on out there. They used the west 1 acre, east 1 acre about 3 days and 2 years. But they said, oh no, our engineers who man that place tell us that it's really important for them to have that whole 2 acres right there, so we're not interested anymore. So after that, I kind of put it off to the side because then we're dealing with, I mean, I don't know, Travis, has probably been close to 2 years since we started the very beginning of dealing with the railroad on getting approval to go underneath for our trail. So I figured I only want to have one battle with the railroad right now, and that was getting under the railroad tracks. Now this is done. Maybe we can talk to them again, but before when we tried it,
yeah.
And the other problem is, just so you'll know, the other problem we were experiencing at the time is, this is something I learned from talking to railroad people. For decades, railroad trains have been 10 to 11,000 feet long, the normal train. In the last couple of years, those lengths of trains has extended like 12 to 14,000 feet, you know, 2.5 miles long. Because they need to have certain turnoff areas when trains pass, a lot of those turnoff areas were made for 10 to 11,000 square foot trains. And so they've been trying to figure out how do we lengthen those things to be able to get our bigger trains off the tracks when we need them off the tracks. And so there was kind of like an absolute moratorium on talking about giving up any of our property anywhere, because we don't know what we're going to need to deal with that issue. So that was about a year and a half ago I heard that. So maybe after we get this contract signed to go underneath the railroad tracks, then we start talking about the maintenance yard, because that's a great question. I don't think they need to use it. We even had property about a half mile down the tracks, exact same configuration, track level. We were willing to buy it and let them trade and move the maintenance yard down there, and they didn't even respond. So, great suggestion. We're always thinking, trying. But you know, it's like Putin. We only want to have one battle with them at a time. With the railroad, we just want one battle at a time.
You always count on the railroad.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Wilcox?
My understanding was when the $5 million loan was in effect, a portion of the property was sold, the balance would be due. That still applied now that the money owed is actually URA to city.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is, could the URA sell it off piecemeal if they choose to?
Yeah, the obligation is between the city and the Urban Renewal Agency, and as part of that intergovernmental agreement between those two government entities, that's the requirement. Should the URA come up with a scenario where they're going to sell it off in 4 separate lots at different times, those two government agencies could agree to amend the IGA to allow them to do it incrementally. What the paperwork says at the moment is that if you sell the property you have to repay the city.
Mayor Lauer, do you have your hand up?
No.
Okay, sorry. Any other questions? Not seeing any.
Okay, so fulfill our regulatory requirement for the Urban Renewal Agency budget tonight. Public comment on the Urban Renewal Agency budget, again, same guidelines, business-like manner, 5 minutes per speaker. Relative to the URA budget, not city business, not other items, et cetera. Same 3 parts, and then the chair would close the public hearing. So with that, I'll stop
Okay, at
sharing.
this time, I'd like to open the public comment for the Budget Committee for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale. And any online? No comments received? Anyone in chambers wishing to speak? No? Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Public comment period is now closed.
Unless there's any further committee questions for this evening, typically we adjourn the Urban Renewal Agency meeting till Wednesday night, and then we'll revisit it and presumably be in a position to approve the budget, but I don't have anything further for this evening on this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any comments before we adjourn the Urban Renewal Agency for this evening? Okay, seeing none. Okay, at this time, entertain a motion. I need a motion for this, I believe. Entertain a motion to adjourn the Budget Committee meeting for the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Troutdale.
So we adjourn the URA meeting for this evening?
Okay, and did you want to? Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee meeting for this evening. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned, and at this time we will reconvene the Budget Committee meeting for the City of Troutdale.
Okay, well, typically what we would do next is start in looking the departmental reviews, and let's see if I can get this to fire up. There we go. Okay, so departmental reviews down at the bottom of the first page of your agenda, Public Works. So continuing operations, materials and services inflation increases, pending salary and benefit cost increases, otherwise status quo and ordinary operations. There are general fund divisions that are funded out, I'm sorry, they're public, they're general fund divisions that are managed by the general fund management staff and team, the solid waste recycling division, the parks division, the facilities division. Solid waste recycling is on page 77, no change in FTEs. Of course, where it has a whopping, I think, 1/10 of an FTE allocated to it. Our environmental specialist. Get my page turned here. 0.3, I'm sorry, of the FTE. Continuing the litter patrol, I know we had a question about what that was. 2 years ago, the state provided through the Christmas tree appropriations bill at the end of the session, the legislature threw a bunch of money at Metro for cleanup funds, which then Metro administered out to the various jurisdictions. Ryan, the environmental specialist, was able to put in an application, got us $240,000, which we used for the cleanup patrol and the litter, and then for we closed it out with the purchase of a whole bunch of the forget the belly, what do you call them?
Big belly.
Big belly trash receptacles, some of which have been deployed, but more are coming, and you'll see those. But we're in the budget, we're continuing that litter patrol. It's done by, just had their name and I just forgot it. Sorry, it's a not for profit. They come out and do the once per week litter patrol that we've been using for the last 2 years and have continued that. That continues to be in the budget. Otherwise, it's same continuation. There's no capital in that division. The Parks Department on page 85. So we have the one additional FTE and the capital projects. So the the capital projects are on page 92. So we talked about last year, the continuation of the skate spot design construction process, the North Beaver Creek Bridge replacement, which is an evolving, ongoing project as well. Continued ADA access improvements that are necessary for us to comply with our ADA plan, Public Works access plans on sidewalks as well as in parks and elsewhere within city facilities. This is the parks piece of it. The dog park, finishing out some amenities and so forth. So the dog park there, we have small dog fenced area, water service for the dogs, water service for the parents who may want a water fountain and not want to share the one with the dogs. Benches for the parents to watch from, as well as waste stations. So some of the amenity items that we building out on the dog park. The North Beaver Creek Bridge, we've, I think, shown this before, but this is the dangerous bridge that is no longer usable for several years. That's just a example, or that's not exactly what it is. It's just to be a illustration of the alternative.
Actually, that's really close to the design we're pursuing, actually, in terms of how the railings are established.
Well, good, it was a good example.
Good example.
But it's not, I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea that that's exactly it and it's in place. It's not, that's just so construction, 950, grant funds, 550 for metro and state parks. You know, these are still some squishy numbers because we're still going through the grant process, funding process. So it's likely going to be one that evolves both this year and probably next year.
I want to comment, just give you insight on what things cost to get done in government and in a canyon like Beaver Creek. The cost to actually build and deliver the bridge to that canyon is roughly about $525,000. The soft costs and contingencies and permit fees are another $400,000. About right, Travis?
More or less, yeah, the design costs are a big part of that. And then,
Yeah.
permitting as well.
It'll be great when it's done, and it'll be a great benefit for the citizens, but it's just hard to work within a system that has such a high overhead over the actual product that you're getting. So that's why we've gone slowly on this.
The Blumenauer Beaver Creek Bridge.
Oh!
Careful, we'll name you after it. How's that?
Be $1 billion.
So the skate park, this is graphics from last year as well. Skate spot, continuing the process. It's a very deliberate process. It is not a done deal by any means, regardless of some concerns raised by folks recently. It's still proposed, still very much in the design process, the community outreach and communication process. Isn't there yet, so if you go look for it, you won't find it. It's split between the general fund in this division that's here, as well as 6% comes from the Parks SDC fund. That's why the numbers are sort of an oddball kinds of amounts. So those are the capital projects in parks. Facilities is 93. There's no changes there. The capital projects are on 98. Again, similar to the rebuild of the CCD parking lot, that's a carryover, and yes, the amount has gone up because The previous estimate was, shall we say, much more abbreviated process by the contractor, a more extensive, more realistic assessment was done, and the condition is in worse shape, so there's gonna be a bit more rebuild than just repair. ADA facility upgrades as well, some CCB cameras, security cameras, and some expansion of the parking lot area so that we have a place to properly park the trailers and mowers and so forth that are up there. That's on page 98. So before I then jump into the Public Works operating funds, let me stop and see if there were questions related to the general fund divisions that we just touched on for Public Works.
Okay, Counselor Clance?
Call on me before I can even get the hand up. I have a on what can be used in each fund. In anything that says SDC, that's just going to be for capital, correct?
Correct, and limitations on the type of capital that can be used on.
On SDC, what about some of the other ones? Is it only the SDCs that are limited that way?
Well, there's SDC funds, there are improvement funds, and there are reimbursement funds. They have limitations as to the type of capital improvement that each can fund. And so you can end up paying for a capital project fund, a capital project from your general operations, potentially a portion of it from each of those SDC funds, depending on the nature of that capital project, or it could be restricted to one of those sources. It just depends.
So I thought I saw that like in Public Works, they had FTEs. Is that a different type of fund?
There are no personnel in the SDC funds. The personnel costs are in the operating funds in Public Works.
Thank you.
Mr. Mann?
On the solid waste, Ray, we're gonna get back. We had some funds available to different community organizations for upgrades and usefulness and whatnot from Metro that we used to have for a long time, and that started up again last year. Are we gonna get that again? Excuse me for being so vague, but.
Yeah, you are. But I think, Travis, do we know, is there anything from Metro about any more of those cleanup funds coming back?
No, that was kind of a one-shot deal. It was associated with, it was actually a spin-off from the World Track and Field Championships a couple of years ago, so that was kind of a one-time thing. But what you may be referring to, Gene, are the community enhancement grant funds.
Yeah, that's what I am.
And the council's been talking with Metro about that a lot lately, and Ray,
Community Enhancement Grant Fund.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
it. I told you I was.
That program was taken back by Metro, and then Metro hired East County Rising, a nonprofit in Rockwood, to administer those. And right now they're in the process of reviewing and awarding grants, which are now open to programs in Fairview Wood Village and Troutdale.
So if my HOA would want to get involved in something like that, how would they go about it?
They can't, the grant period's already gone past. You have to wait till next year.
So how do we get information on that?
City council meetings.
Yeah, there was a website, we on the Facebook and our website, we posted information on it back in December and January when it was open. So you gotta think that usually about the end of the year, you should start asking about, because usually it's the springtime they get awarded. And it's about $100,000, and it's a partial grant for essentially cleanup or beautification projects.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I can get you information that was available this year, so you guys can prepare for next year.
Okay, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Counselor White?
You know, I think it's important to mention to you that we're the only city that has a transfer station that is being forced by Metro to share it with the surrounding cities. I just think something should be done about that. Couldn't resist piping off on that.
Continue? Okay. So the Public Works funds move into the operating funds. These are the funds in Public Works that have FTEs associated with them. So the Internal Services Fund on page 155, it's got two divisions. Routine and ordinary operations, whoops, clicked too fast there. It has the Public Works Management and the engineering staff in the one subdivision or division within that fund, and then the equipment maintenance staff is in the other. This was the one last year where we finally broke down and replaced the 2003 van with the 114,000 miles in it. So we don't have to make that expenditure this year. But yeah, it's pretty much routine as you go for that fund. Let's get to the right page here. So on the operating, on the sewer fund, page 146, back, sewer fund capital items. The pickup truck replacement split between the sewer fund and the stormwater fund. The office expansion that we, design process that we started this year continues into next year. The dry vehicle storage. And then when the budget worksheets were sent in, I sent an email down to Sean and said, what is a Vector 2100i? What the heck is that?
It's awesome.
And that is what it is. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I just didn't know what the heck it was called by name. But the current one, I think, was what, 10 years ago?
11 years ago.
11 years ago. So it's, and we're continuing to have breakdown problems with it. So it's problematic for supporting operations. So anyway, but that's what that item is. And it's split between the sewer fund and the stormwater fund.
So would this be adding another truck to the litter?
Well, it's going to replace the one that from 11 years. We're not going to keep the one that's broken down because it doesn't work. Well, when it's broken down, it doesn't work, obviously. But, the water fund, page 135. That's a well, the first item I'm mentioning there on the capital. That's a carryover. It's the hydro excavation truck. Let's see. Oh yeah, I had pictures of this last year. The challenge there has been the long lead time, and the manufacturers had such demand they closed down ordering for a period of time, so they wouldn't let us place the order. Now they finally let us place the order, but it's not going to come in until next fiscal year, so that's why we've got it listed. We're not buying one this year and another one next year. It's the same one. It's just a carryover. Equipment control valves, ongoing reservoir and water main improvements, again, routine and ordinary. Street fund, 154, sidewalk infill. Ray mentioned earlier the Dunbar Avenue projects. That comes from multiple funds. There's part of it's street repairs, part of it's some stormwater, some water lines. So it has multiple items. If you look back on in the page 18 where it's listed, it's got several different subcomponents, and it goes back to those silos where we can't use money in the street fund to replace the stormwater lines because it's stormwater, not streets. So it's getting that overall rebuild of that avenue is getting funded from multiples of those different funds. Stormwater fund, 176, again, a lot of what's in the stormwater fund gets split, particularly on the equipment side, split with the sewer fund, the Vector, as we mentioned before, the office space, the pickup truck, etc. Stewart Ridge project is another carryover, which I forgot to label, as well as the materials processing station. Again, ordinary and routine. So let me stop there because those were the ones that have the FTEs. We start to get into the improvement funds that don't. Okay.
No questions? Oh, Mr. Wilcox.
I have a question. When you have a piece of equipment, for example, split between two funds, is the budget amount listed for each fund doubled? The hydro truck, for example.
It should be half in each one. Sometimes the labeling will say half, sometimes it won't, but that's the intent.
So looking at the 2 pages, that would be a $190,000 cut.
For the hydro excavator one that was in this year's budget that we're carrying over to next year, yeah.
So it's 2 times 95.
Right. Yeah.
Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, and it would help my getting question answered that I wouldn't have to ask. Some of the stuff is marked half and some isn't. It's like the one question I asked Ray about the 1.17 million.
Yeah.
When you look on page 176, it's half of that, but it doesn't say half. And so that would,
Yeah.
Just one of my many budget errors that I make every year, so it's one of my oversights. Okay, we get into the capital improvement funds, the water improvement SDC fund on 182, the sewer improvement fund on 194, street improvement on 206, stormwater improvement on 218. These are all the improvement SDC funds. They're, they're, again, all routine and ordinary. We've got stuff budgeted in there for some projects like the Dunbar that are identified. A lot of them have money budgeted available for studies or to be able to support expansion based on development. So if there's a developer that comes in and we need to do, but again, the money is siloed, so we can only use it for that purpose. And so we have it appropriated so that if we have to put in a water line related to some development and it's eligible for the SDC funding, we have the funding available to do that. But this is one of the areas, the improvement, the SDC fund is one of the areas why we have large capital expenditure in the budget every year, but not spend nearly that much on actual capital expenditures. Because a lot of this is, I don't want to use the word contingency because that has a definitive term in the budget law, but essentially it's there for the potential so that we're able to say yes to developers rather than no, you're going to have to wait a year till we can change the budget. Not something that council wants to do for economic development. The other set is the reimbursement funds on the SDC side, water, sewer, street, and stormwater. Only in the 6th year, it's minimal balances. Again, design studies for development and growth, system rebuild, again, ordinary and routine operations. And the other public works funds that I mentioned in the overview, the utilities undergrounding, get a question about that every year. It's a very large amount. We budget the entire amount that we think is going to be available, because if we have the opportunity to successfully wrestle PGE to the ground and actually get them to do an undergrounding project, we've got to make sure that we've got the money appropriated that we can spend on the project, rather than get them to finally commit to do it and then say, oh, sorry, you got to wait until next year when we can get the money out of the fund.
Mr. Bent?
Speaking of that, Eric, do we have a status on the grant issue going over at Beaver Creek?
I know you asked Eric, I'll interrupt. Travis, do we hear anything more from Multnomah County on the grant? They had to design the culvert under Troutdale Road.
Well, last I heard, they had obtained the design design. They were going for a construction grant, and I have not heard the results of that. I don't think that the results have come out yet. That was a 6 weeks, 7 months ago, something like that, probably. So I want to check in with Multnomah County and see if they have a result on that.
Just to put all this in context for everyone, we've been saving that money for a long time to do undergrounding, and the area that primarily I think we're going to use it for is Troutdale Road. And what's happened is PGE has changed their process internally. It used to be they had a whole engineering department that would work with you and do the design for the undergrounding for that area. And then years ago, they got rid of that department and said, well, can you guys do the design for us? Which is kind of weird because it's their power, and why would we design it for you? But the second thing is then we found out that what we're talking about is the culvert, as you're going down south on or north on Troutdale Road, and you cross Beaver Creek, there's no sidewalks, it's just an ugly little canyon down there. Well, like they did on Stark and Cochrane, the county really wants to upgrade that culvert so it's more fish friendly. And so they got a grant to design it, they're trying to get a construction grant. So they're getting grants from the feds to help out and the state to help out on that, so that's moving forward. And so the thought was, well, if we're gonna tear up that whole stretch of Troutdale Road anyway, that would be the right time to go ahead and do the undergrounding when part of the road is already torn up, as opposed to the old government trick is water comes in, tears up the street, puts in a water line, a month later sewer comes in, tears up the street, and does a sewer line. This is, that's kind of what we're waiting on now. So yeah, we talked to PGE a fair amount to know that we really want to get going on this project soon, and they're aware of it.
Would have saved us from that 24-hour loss of power when somebody hit the power pole.
Anything you get underground is something less to blow down. Yes.
Yeah, saves us from ice storms or from people hitting power poles, either one. And the council was wise years ago to establish that privilege tax, and the money goes in there every year. It's segregated, it's there, it's very much siloed. It doesn't get spent for anything else. And so, that's part of what we bang on PGE about is, we've dedicated this money for this purpose. And it helps you because it helps your system reliability.
And if I could add, it so happens that the PG franchise is going through renewal right now, and we are negotiating that with them, and the staff's been negotiating very hard to get better controls in the franchise so that we can more effectively compel them to cooperate on some of these underground projects. And that's something we've been fighting very hard on that franchise renewal.
I want to be able to let Travis put him in a headlock and give him a noogie. Yeah, that'd be good.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was going to ask, so those improvement funds, they're kind of specific numbers. So I was wondering if we have an idea in our head what we're thinking we're going to need the funds for. One of the things I'm also thinking about is the state has pretty much tied the city's hands as to how or if we can develop our city to be an environment we actually want to live in. They tend to want us to be more like Portland, and I'm not sure I want to fund that. So I just kind of questioning, what is it we're thinking we're going to need those improvement funds for?
Well, I'll take a whack at it and then Travis can correct all my errors, but the SDC rates are based on having done the master plans and established what would be required for infrastructure build out, and that's how the rates are established. Then as permits are issued and people pay the funds into this, the funds have to then be used for something that's been in that approved capital improvement plan for that fund. So it isn't something that necessarily we come up with. It's, the whole process is driven by a long-term design.
You pretty much got it, Eric. All of those projects that are paid for out of the SDC improvement funds are in the capital improvement plan, which are sourced primarily from the master plan. So there are various steps along the sequence that lead to that, and all of those go through public process and are approved by council.
Mr. Minkoff?
My first question has to do with when is the appropriate time, or has it passed already, to ask a question of clarification on the contingency and unappropriated lines of when we get into each one of these different funds, public works funds in particular. Can I ask that now, or is there a specific time to talk about line items?
Wait, you do it at the end. Do it at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do it at the end of the presentation.
Thank you.
Counselor Glanz, you had your hand up as well.
I was gonna ask just a general question about these different funds, but I can wait till the end.
Okay.
The Bike and Path Trails Fund, page 235, I think I made mention of this during the shared state revenue presentation. This fund is funded by the 1% of the state gas tax revenue that we receive. It's required by statute that go into it. Currently, we're in the proposed budget would be, I believe, the final year of repayment of a loan that we loan to the Bike and Path Trails Fund, because again, this fund, the uses of it are very restricted. It's got to be used for bike paths and trails. You can't use it for streets, you can't use it for water, you can't use it in the general fund. It's very restricted. Well, a couple of years ago, when we had to do the rebuild of the Robbins Way Trail, what was required was more than what we had available in the fund at the time. So we loaned money to the fund, and it is repaying it from those dedicated funds that are allowed to be used for the trail. And then it'll go back to the way it was before the Robbins Way Trail was done. It'll start to accumulate funds over time, and then we'll come up with another trail project that we can spend it on. That's really all it can do, because it's a very restricted purpose fund. Street tree fund is another restricted fund. It's required to be funded by developers related to street trees, street tree replacement. We can't use it for water, we can't use it for any other purpose but for street trees. Page 172. So we estimate what we're going to have and we appropriate it so that it's available to spend if need be. Parks Improvement Fund, page 240. As I mentioned before, that's sort of we've used as our piggy bank or our bank or our loan fund currently. The fund has got 2 loans out to the general fund and 1 loan out to the Bike Path Trails Fund that I mentioned before. 4 years ago, we borrowed from the Parks SDC Fund to fund the cost for remodeling the depot, and we're in the we pay that back annually. From the TLT funds are allowed to be used for tourism-related facilities, which that is our visitor center now, and so it qualifies, so we use the funds for that. And then the second loan is the 1.5 million that we borrowed from it, that we turned around and are gonna loan into the Urban Renewal Agency for the match money for the metro and state grants for the trail construction. And then, what was the third one I said? Oh, the Robbins Way Trail. I mentioned that. So anyway, but it's similar to the SDC funds for water or for sewer or for storm. You can only use it for that dedicated purpose. Master plans were approved by the council for parks. It drives the capital improvement plans. It drives what projects are allowed to be funded by the SDC funds from the Parks Improvement Fund. We can't spend Parks SDC money on upgrading a sewer line or stormwater or water line. It's, again, siloed funds. The Sam Cox Building Fund is page 245. That was a fund the council created 10, 11 years ago, related to funding. It's a special revenue fund associated with the maintenance for the Sam Cox Building, routine chair replacement, AV upgrades that occurred, etc. There's no staffing in any of these these funds.
Mr. Mann?
Well, on the street tree, since it's mandated, the type of tree, where they go and how, and the space between them, and specifically in a residential neighborhood, why is the homeowner responsible for the replacement thereof and repair to sidewalks, etc., driveways, to routes, etc.? Why is not the city?
That takes us off into delving into how the municipal code was adopted and the purposes behind that, which is a little bit far afield from the budget process, so.
Oh, well, just, you hear where I'm coming from.
It's certainly something that could be revisited by the council if they so chose, but it's sort of, staff operates within the framework that's been established by council ordinance.
Short answer would be because we can.
That's what I gathered. That was almost as good as the Metro laugh.
So I was just gonna point out, street tree fund is actually page 177, not 172.
Sorry. Got my page numbers
Saw
wrong.
another hand over there.
I just had a comment, since staff's gonna be meeting with PGE, that the amount they spend on storm damage from this last storm probably would have covered undergrounding power lines, and they're trying to pass that on to the consumer after just increasing it 18%.
They're
Much?
They did do
29.8, yes. Fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're dealing with questions, I'm sorry.
Okay, here we go. So general questions on the public works funds. Take those now. Councilor Glantz.
I have a question. If we were to have one of the events on one of our streets that's like, you know, the Godzilla sinkhole in front of Mount Hope Community College a few years back, how would we pay for that? What funds could we use?
Well, that particular circumstance thankfully was, well, sorry that it happened, but thankfully it was Gresham's responsibility. You know, I don't know what all they used. I'm sure immediately they just responded to it. How they ultimately funded the repair, I'm not sure. We can always use general fund money because it is the most flexible, but of course that's also has the most demands on it. You know, that particular one I think was related more so to stormwater, that particular item. So presumably Gresham reached out or, you know, dug into their stormwater related funds, whether they were able to make use of, you know, any of the SDC funds that they have on that, I don't know, but that's where it would have geared toward.
I guess I would just say in that situation, I know that they applied for and were using unappropriated money. That was their plan to do that fix. So,
Yeah, whether they got any state or federal
Right.
help as a result of, you know, it certainly was an unplanned event.
Right.
None of the contingencies we have in any of the funds would be eligible to use for that.
Well, certainly contingency in the stormwater fund would be, you know, an appropriate fit for that particular circumstance.
Yeah, if you notice in the budget, it calls for about, I think, $6 to $7 million in the storm sewer, the storm water, and the street funds. So we have potential between the two, $6 to $7 million that's not obligated to a specific line item between those two funds. So we've got a fair amount of seed money if we have to dip into it. We hope we don't have to.
Right, thank you.
That was what you were kind of directly asking, I think.
Yes.
I can just add that the first funds I would look at for something like that, let's just presume it was related to a stormwater problem, would be the stormwater fund and then the stormwater reimbursement fund. The stormwater reimbursement fund, while an SDC fund, is eligible for capital funding of replacement, rehab, repair, capital costs, not, operating costs.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Minkoff?
Yeah, I have a question that relates to the contingency and unappropriated lines on each one of the funds. I know it was addressed very early on. Mr. Young talked about the lockbox idea and that those funds are there to, that are generally, according to my notes here, are generally not spent, but they're there in case. And I also see, obviously, the math requires those line items to be there so that the resources equal the requirements, or actually in reverse. You got to have the requirements equaling the resources. But here's my question. If you look at page 149 and you look at the street fund as a good example, you can see that since 2021, almost all of the funds in the unappropriated line were used in that year. And they were almost all used again in 2022 and again in 2023. The point is, if you look at any one of the funds, you can see that the fund balance, look at the top line, that fund balance doesn't increase by the amount of the unappropriated line each year. That means that those funds are being spent every year. You'll see the beginning balance started at $4,004,000 in 2021. If you add 4.5 million of unappropriated, you'd expect, and it wasn't used, you would expect that the fund balance the next year would be $8 million, but it's not. It's 4.5 million, which means that the 4.5 million was spent. And again, it's spent, the 4.8 million is spent because the beginning fund balance, it remains almost the same. That means all that requirement money had to have been spent. So my question is, if that's the case, you're shaking your head because you're saying it's not spent. If it's not spent, where did it go?
It didn't go anywhere. In the 2021-2022 column, the 508 is essentially it's just the math. It's the leftover. What is left over to balance, just as you said, to balance resources to requirements. As you'll note, that number then becomes the beginning fund balance in the next column up at the top. Because it's essentially what was left over, it's the unappropriated ends up being the ending fund balance of that year, then becomes the beginning fund balance of the subsequent year.
Okay, because the beginning balance, fund balance is included in the total resources number.
Right.
So really the actual net revenue of that fund is $2,269,000. That is the actual the revenue expected for that year. 2021, 2022, the net resources is 2.2 million.
You turn the page to 150, that will show you the revenue sort of broken out so that it's not kind of glommed together.
150, okay.
Yeah, Kevin, like I said, the municipal budgeting is odd compared to business or personal finances, and it does take some time to get used to how the numbers shift and where they carry over.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. That's the clarification I needed.
You bet.
Okay, other questions on? Seeing none so far. Okay. Everybody's good?
Good.
Mr. Mayor?
I don't know if this is appropriate time, but Eric, a couple what I see, I'm guessing are grammatical, clerical errors.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty.
Would you like me to bring what I found to your attention?
Sure, I don't know that you need to waste the entire committee's time with it, we can meet afterwards.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm sure Paul will get to him pretty soon.
All right. No question. Mr. Barney?
So to clarify, at this point, are we talking about just one section of the book or the whole book?
This time we're talking about the public works funds. Okay, all of those that are under public works.
Okay, maybe I better wait then, because I have a more general question.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything? What do you got next?
I'm done with the presentation plan for this evening, and so we have more fun in store for us on Wednesday night. The rest of the agenda, including grammatical errors and page number errors, will be forthcoming.
Okay. Now, from a general standpoint, does anyone have any questions for staff that they would like to possibly have researched between now and Wednesday? I'd like to get those out. Mr. Allen?
Okay, I seem to remember, we're talking about FTEs, and I seem to remember that in 2008, we knocked the FTEs on the Parks Department quite a bit due to the 2008 recession. And it seems like we've been slow to get back to where we had been. And I'm just wondering where this FTE increase this time puts us in comparison.
Off the top of my head, I think we're still one down from what we were at that point.
Yeah, because it seemed like in 2008, they did a pretty darn good job with the parks. And now we've increased the number of tests we have for them, but have been slow to recover their department.
Yeah, and we've attempted year to year to supplement it with summer seasonals, which has helped, but, you know, they're only able to do so much because they're temporaries, they're not, you know, regular status employees, and, you know, they're not around year round, and summer to summer, you get different levels of, shall I say, satisfaction with the expertise and conscientiousness of the temporaries that you're able to find any particular summer, so that's how we've attempted to muddle through.
Well, I think Paul can correct me on this, but I think we had temporaries prior to 2008 as well.
Oh, I'm sure we did. We had bulked up the number over during that period.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just so you'll know, we did not break out parks, facilities, and planning and code specialties until 2010, 2011 budget. I have this old sheet that I copied from a really old budget.
Yeah, I have a volume set. I was just having family visit.
Oh, have you got them bound yet?
Yeah. I just didn't have time to look at it before this meeting.
So as an example, I guess, 14, 15 was when we did the breakup of the police, right? And went with the county. So at that time, when we had our own police, we were basically at 72 FTE. And so 2015 was the first year that we made the change. It dropped us to 47. Next year, 48, 50, 51, 54, 57, 21, 22 was 58. And now we're looking at, I think it's 65.
Yeah, what I did in the 2007, 2008 budget, we had a total of 82 FTE, but 26 was police. So I took off the police to get us down to what I think I said earlier, 56 or 57. The equivalent 2007, 2008 to what we're staffing now for.
Okay.
If I could add a comment as well, you know, historical comparisons are great. We did just complete a Parks Master Plan, and as part of that Parks Master Plan, through our independent consultants doing their analysis, they pegged us at about 2 short prior to adding this last FTE, where we probably should be on Parks operations staff full time, just compared to what a typical standard would be for most cities and the amount of parks that we have. So when you just base it on a more contemporary analysis, we're still probably about 1 short where we should be.
Thank you.
questions for research? Mr. Barney?
This isn't so much research, but I thought I'd ask it because it's just a quick clarification one.
Sure.
For Eric. So I was looking in some sections of the book and I'm wondering, what does it mean when it says #REF exclamation point?
Well, that is likely a formula error in Excel, so I'd be happy to have you point those pages out to me afterwards so that I can fix them for the next print.
Okay, because that's what I was guessing, but I wanted to make sure.
Mr. White?
I think for me, it'd be helpful to see when these parks are gonna be completed. Like the linear park, what's the date of that before we start taking on more staff, you know, for parks that haven't even been built yet. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it, because I'm also concerned that security might be a bigger issue for us than, you know, than park maintenance on a, like especially a trail like that, so near kind of a troubled area already. Just a thought.
Okay. All right. Other questions? You have one, Paul? Okay. All right. Thank you, good.
I did have one other quick question. I was curious where that covered parking area, where that's gonna occur.
Which, I'm sorry?
The covered vehicle parking.
Oh, you're talking about the drive, that's, at this point, Travis, where do you think you're looking to put that place?
Right now, we're looking at the only place where we have space, which is the wastewater plant. So it's the only place where we have real estate or something like that. That's the current thinking. We haven't really done this design at this point, so we can't say for sure, but that's the thinking.
And is that for stuff like the 2001 vacuum truck or whatever?
That and other pieces of equipment, trucks that
Just being the
are
equipment?
being parked outside, and
Okay.
obviously it's not good for their shorts of life.
Would
Also
they-
security issues.
Would that get all our stuff out from being in the weather?
Everything at this time that we think we need to get into dry storage, we think we can cover. 10, 15, 20 years down the road, who knows?
All right.
Any other questions? All right. Do you have anything else, Mr. Newman?
No, sir.
Okay. So the plan will be to come back on Wednesday and go through the remaining departments. And then we will deliberate the budget, make any recommendations, set the tax rates, those types of things. All right, any questions with that?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Well, you guys are quick. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn for this evening. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. See you all Wednesday night.
Thank you.